Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Lauren and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations and the technical requirements for device approval in Moldova. The National Regulatory Agency for Electronic Communications and Information Technology, or ANRCETI, regulates the radio frequency spectrum and regulatory standardization in Moldova, as well as the import, distribution, and sale of information technology equipment and telecommunications products on the Moldovan market. The management and utilization of the radio frequency spectrum is carried out in an efficient manner so as to prevent harmful disturbances or interference. Through standardization and government policy, ANRCETI is able to provide quality guarantees to offer the proper protection to both the public and other importers and manufacturers. Radio frequency devices are required to be properly approved by ANRCETI prior to being marketed or imported into Moldova. A certificate of type approval is required for radio equipment and other regulated devices and services to be sold in or imported into the country. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today we will be going over the requirements of radio frequency and telecommunications approvals in Moldova. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your products on the right track for authorization and distribution in Moldova. If you have any questions on the topics presented today, or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Let's begin the presentation. So, starting with a brief overview, what is ANRCETI? This is the National Regulatory Agency for Electronic Communications and Information Technology. They ensure the implementation of sector development strategies and supervise compliance of electronic communications network and service providers with Moldovan legislation. Moldova and the European Union have a conformity assessment and acceptance agreement, which means Moldova has adopted many European standards for certification. ANRCETI promotes competition and ensures that users benefit with fair prices and quality of services in communications and information. Any company wishing to sell or import their product in Moldova must first go through the channels to get the proper certifications. All telecommunication equipment, including radio modules and host devices capable of radio communication, are subject to ANRCETI approval, and it is mandatory for every wireless or telecom device that's produced, assembled, used, or traded within the Moldova territory to comply with the technical requirements based on the applicable regulation. A certificate of type approval is required for radio equipment and other regulated devices to be sold in or imported to Moldova. There are three main approval procedures for type approval. The three ways to obtain approval are internal production control, type examination, and full quality assurance. Internal production control is mostly done for simple products without a deep level of testing. This method can also be done for non-radio frequency products. Type examination is the most common approval method, and full quality assurance is mainly for complex radio and telecommunications equipment. To determine which approval process to take for radio frequency products, we must take a look at the harmonized standards, which I will go over in a couple of slides. It is possible for manufacturers of radio and telecommunications terminal equipment imported from EU member countries to apply with a conformity certificate or test reports issued by an accredited notified body that has an EA multilateral agreement in place. Products that do not meet that criteria will have to continue with the normal application process, and any products requiring testing may be done in Moldova. Now, let's briefly take a look at an overview of the approval process. Okay, so we know that radio frequency products require approval prior to import, sale, distribution, and operation within Moldova. Now let's take a look at the process for obtaining the approval. This process is how ANRCETI ensures that radio frequency devices used in Moldova operate effectively without causing harmful interference and otherwise comply with all regulations. When starting a new application, we first determine the relevant requirements, current conditions, and find out what is applicable and if approval is able to be granted. First, we submit the new application, and it will get reviewed to make sure all documents are in order and the product will comply with all the rules and regulations. We must be prepared to provide one normal end-user sample, which can be requested by the authority after evaluation of the application. When the technical documents provided are not sufficient enough, additional testing is required. If this is the case, the lead time for the type approval certificate will be 4 to 6 weeks. Once everything is approved and the product is deemed in compliance, the certificate will be issued to grant access to the Moldovan market. It is important to note that there is no local representative required for approval in Moldova, and certification for family grouping is allowed. Different models can be listed in one certificate or declaration of conformity, but only if all the models are indicated in the same test reports. Internal production control only involves the manufacturer issuing their own declaration of conformity. Every electronic product being imported into Moldova must have a DOC. Any non-radio frequency product only needs a declaration of conformity to be put on the market, but it is the manufacturer's full responsibility to stay in compliance with the country's current requirements. To follow this approval method, one must first perform a conformity assessment of the product, either done by the manufacturer or by a third party. Testing must be done in full to harmonized standards, and technical documentation must be prepared. The manufacturing process must be monitored to ensure conformity of the product. After affixing the mark to each product, the manufacturer can issue a declaration of conformity. Type examination is different from internal production control in that it uses a notified body. You may use this method if there are too many product variants and testing of all the configurations may be impractical, or if the product is too large to test as per requirements. For this method, the manufacturer must first go through the internal quality control procedure. They will establish all the relevant technical documents and ensure everything is needed to be issued a type examination certificate. The manufacturer will affix the conformity mark to their product and issue a declaration of conformity. On the other hand, the national certification body will examine the technical design of the equipment and verify that all documents have been submitted and other essential requirements have been met. The NCB will draw up their evaluation report and issue the type examination certificate to the manufacturer. Documents for this method should be in the state language. This full quality assurance method of approval is for more complex radio and telecommunications equipment. The manufacturer must use an approved quality system for the design, manufacture, final inspection, and testing of their product. They will establish and create any relevant technical documents and the documents concerning the quality system. They will then affix the conformity mark onto the product and issue their own declaration of conformity. With this full quality assurance method, the conformity mark must have the NCB identification number under the SM mark. The NCB will assess the quality system that the manufacturer has adopted, and they will carry out periodic audits. The NCB will draw up conclusions of these examinations and make an assessment decision to provide a certificate. This chart shows which approval process is applicable when harmonized standards are used, are not used, are used only in part, or do not exist at all. Some harmonized standards, references of which have been published in the Official Journal of the European Union, have been adopted as national standards in Moldova. Every telecommunications equipment traded, made, assembled, imported, and/or used in Moldova are required to comply with the technical regulations. Here is a list of some of the regulated radio frequency and telecommunications products. These regulated products vary from telecommunications terminal equipment, radio and TV equipment, communications and data processing modems, and radio remote controls. It even includes products that are supplied for telecommunications equipment, such as electrical insulators, wires, and cables. All products in this list are subject to regulation. These are some of the applicable regulations for radio frequency, EMC, and safety in Moldova. Products must comply with the applicable regulations in order to be imported or sold in Moldova. These regulations are for radio equipment, telecommunications terminal equipment, electromagnetic compatibility, and low voltage electrical equipment. HG 1274 2007 and HG 34 2019 are applicable for radio frequency products. HG 807 2015 is for electromagnetic compatibility, and HG 745 2015 is for safety of low voltage electrical equipment. They outline what you need in order to be in conformity with the regulations and to get your product on the Moldovan market. The requirements for a Moldovan certificate of conformity are listed here. You will need to submit a general description of the product, including photos and a user manual, the conceptual design, drawings, scheme circuits, etc., description of the operation of the radio equipment, the list of applicable harmonized standards, a copy of the Declaration of Conformity or a simplified Declaration of Conformity, if applicable, a type examination certificate, test reports and results, and an explanation of the compliance with applicable radio spectrum requirements. Once you have been issued the Certificate of Conformity, it is valid for a period of 3 years. After the certificate has expired, you will have to renew it. The renewal process for the certification is similar to the initial certification procedure. As I said earlier in the presentation, there is no requirement for a local representative in Moldova. The lead time for certification regarding paperwork only is about 2 weeks. When applying for the certificate and submitting all documents, if more testing is required, it will take about 4 to 6 weeks to get the final certificate. Certification labels are required for every product marketed in Moldova. After the successful approval of a product by the authority, the manufacturer is obligated to mark the product and the associated SM or CE mark. The National Conformity Label SM is formed from the letters S and M, which symbolize Safety as Essential Requirements and Moldova. As I touched on briefly in the beginning of this presentation, it is possible for manufacturers of radio and telecommunications terminal equipment imported from EU member countries to apply either the Moldovan National Conformity Mark or the CE Conformity Mark to their products. In order to proceed via CE mark only, manufacturers must obtain a conformity certificate or test reports issued by an accredited notified body that has an EA multilateral agreement in place. Products which do not meet that criteria will still require national type approval, and the Moldovan National Conformity Mark will be applied. So, just to reiterate, equipment should be CE or SM marked to get access to the Moldovan market. All products must have the mark prior to introduction on the market and before its use. Marking of products with the SM conformity mark indicates its compliance with the basic requirements established by the applicable technical regulations. The mark and, if applicable, the certification body identification number shall be applied by the manufacturer or its representative. The certification body identification number comes from the NCB that issued the certificate of conformity, and it is only applicable for products approved through the full quality assurance method. Here is an example of what the certificate of conformity looks like. Some of the information shown on the certificate includes the certificate expiration date. If applicable, it will show the name of the national certification body. It will have the registration number, product details, mandatory regulations that the product is in compliance with, and information on the manufacturer and applicant. All products being imported into Moldova must have the proper certifications. Products must comply with the technical regulations and have a correct label and SM declaration of conformity. In order to get the product through customs, the importer must fill out a customs declaration form in the national language. It is important to note that customs authorities do have the right to seize samples of the imported product if it does not have the proper documents and verification. There also may be tariffs and fees for the imported products. After all documents are accounted for and there is physical verification of the merchandise, Along with the payment of any customs duties, the product is allowed onto Moldovan territory. From there, it can be sold on the Moldovan market as long as it has a certificate and the proper labeling. The ongoing compliance of products and services will be monitored by ANRCETI. Some of the ways surveillance can be done is by checking documentation, requesting samples, and testing samples. If there are any violations detected, sanctions may apply and the manufacturer may have to pay a fine depending on the damage of the violation. The upkeep of surveillance is intended to check the quality of electronic communications services and devices. It seeks to ensure compliance with all the regulatory conditions. So, what are the rules for product changes for certified equipment? When a device is modified, a new approval and certificate is required. Changes or modification must go through a new submission and obtain a new certification. For example, if there is significant change on the physical appearance and radio frequency specification, then we need to make a new certification. But if the change is not significant enough, for example, no radio frequency feature is added or removed, then this can be revised without needing a new certification. In any case, contact the certification body, and they will decide whether to keep the current certification unchanged or to go through the process and issue a new certification. This concludes our webinar on Moldovan market access, certifications, and approvals for electrical equipment and wireless products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for ANRCETI approval and certifications, as well as what requirements are applicable. Compliance with the technical requirements of ANRCETI is required for all radio and telecom products. It ensures telecommunication network interoperability, avoids interference between telecommunication equipment, and ensures public safety. All electrical equipment and devices require approval in Moldova prior to distribution or placement on the market. Vista Compliance Labs specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices. We are a 17025 accredited EMC and RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types in countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.